The Trump-Russia Investigation, Part 6, Conflicts of Interest and Coincidental Correlations. Let's analyze the timeline. We should be able to identify conflicts of interest and identify some things worth questioning. Although I'm sure there are others, I felt like the most complete source for information related to the timeline on the Trump-Russia investigation was ABC News, The Russia Probe, a timeline from Moscow to Mueller. Key observations, a precursor to the timeline. Perkins Coie, a law firm working for the DNC, hired Fusion GPS to conduct opposition research on Donald Trump. Christopher Steele was a former British spy who was working for the FBI as an informant. Steele was a longtime friend of Bruce Ohr, who was the head of the Justice Department's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force and served as a top official inside the Deputy Attorney General's office. Glenn Simpson was the head of Fusion GPS and knew both Steele and Ohr. Christopher Steele and Ohr's wife, Nellie, were hired by Fusion GPS to help with research and analysis. Nellie Ohr just so happens to be a Russian linguist. Questions to consider. Why did Fusion GPS hire Christopher Steele? Was it his connection to Bruce Ohr, or was Glenn Simpson somehow aware of his connection to the FBI? Why did Fusion GPS hire Nellie Ohr? Did they need a Russian linguist because they already knew the direction they wanted to go? Was it because her husband, Bruce Ohr, was a top official in the Deputy Attorney General's office? Prior to relaying information to the FBI, did Bruce Ohr disclose his indirect relationship with Fusion GPS and their role in performing opposition research on Donald Trump? Interesting events on the timeline. In May 2016, the DNC realized they had been hacked and quietly hired a security firm. The hacking was repeated by news media June 14th. June 20th, 2016, Steele compiled the report suggesting the Kremlin had cultivated and compromised Trump and was feeding Trump and his campaign valuable intelligence on Hillary Clinton and others. Steele contacts the FBI in July out of concerns for national security. He said the findings were not shared with the DNC. Around July 31st, 2016, the FBI opened its counterintelligence investigation led by Peter Strzok, the section chief of FBI's counterintelligence division. This occurred nearly a week after Strzok sent a message to an FBI attorney calling Trump an idiot and a disaster. September 2016, Steele tells Bruce Ohr that he is desperate that Trump not get elected and passionate about Trump not being president. Mid-September 2016, Fusion GPS directs Steele to share his findings with the media. According to his testimony, Peter Strzok claims he was made aware of Steele's reports and their allegations. October 2016, Steele briefs officials at the State Department. FBI used a number of reports compiled by Steele to file an application with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to get permission to secretly monitor Carter Page's communications. The application was approved even though the FBI acknowledged that Steele and Fusion GPS were likely looking for information that could be used to discredit Trump. On or shortly after October 28, 2016, Steele shared his reports with a reporter at Mother Jones magazine because he was concerned Comey's letter about Hillary Clinton's emails would have an impact on the election. Only then does the FBI terminate its relationship with Steele. After November 24, 2016, Simpson and Steele discuss reconnecting with Ohr. Simpson and Steele remain in repeated contact with Ohr through late 2017. During this time, Ohr has multiple conversations with FBI officials. July 28, 2017, Peter Strzok is removed from the Mueller's team after the special counsel is told about Strzok's anti-Trump text messages. Late 2017, despite Ohr and Steele working together for so long, Rosenstein's office first learns that Ohr has been in contact with Steele, and Ohr is transferred to a different office. Before I give you some questions to consider, pay close attention to Peter Strzok's statement to Congress.
In the summer of 2016, I was one of a handful of people who knew the details of Russian election interference and its possible connections with members of the Trump campaign. This information had the potential to derail and quite possibly defeat Mr. Trump. But the thought of expressing that or exposing that information never crossed my mind.
Questions to consider. Why did the DNC quietly hire a security firm and appear to hide the fact that they were hacked? Why did the FBI take so long to identify conflicts of interest and reassign Orr? When data or research used to defend a company originates from scientists employed by that company, we tend to be skeptical of their findings. Why wasn't the FBI skeptical of Christopher Steele's reports? Even when they knew he was searching for information to discredit Trump, they used his reports for an application to monitor Carter Page and maintain ties with him. Even when the information was being leaked to the public, they maintained ties with him. Why was Steele so desperate that Trump not get elected? Was this desperation influenced by his employer, Fusion GPS, who later directed Steele to share his reports with the media? Peter Strzok wasn't even assigned to the counterintelligence investigation until the end of July 2016. Supposedly, he wasn't even aware of Steele's reports until mid-September. Could he really have gathered enough information to derail the Trump campaign in such a short period of time? Coincidental correlations. Are these things connected or just coincidence? Russia's interference in 2012 elections. The investigative committee determined that Russia has been interfering with the US elections since the 2012 election. We know they used social media to sow hate and discord in the 2016 election. Although we lack the same amount of detail, we know they used social media in the 2012 election as well. Now, just because two things are correlated does not mean they are connected. Nevertheless, there was something involving Facebook which happened in 2012 which you may find interesting. Facebook's emotional contagion experiment. In 2012, Facebook conducted a social engineering study, which has come to be known as the emotional contagion experiment. They were testing the hypothesis that emotions expressed by others on Facebook influence our own emotions, constituting experimental evidence for massive scale contagion via social networks. 689,000 unwitting participants were randomly selected and divided into 4 groups. Facebook manipulated their newsfeed algorithm to alter the amount of positive and negative posts each group would see. Facebook determined that it was possible to influence the emotions of users, and in-person interaction and nonverbal cues are not strictly necessary for emotional contagion. Questions to consider. What is correlated? The year 2012, social media, mainly Facebook, soliciting an emotional response. Are they connected? I don't know. Emotions are a key factor in marketing which creates a call to action. Do you think a company or country would be interested in spending a significant amount of capital on a marketing campaign if they didn't have some assurance that the marketing campaign would achieve the desired result? Are you familiar with Gamergate?
That whole scandal is built on a girl named Zoe Quinn who says that she was attacked by anonymous white men on the internet, and people were saying that that wasn't true, and she said that it was. And
if they were anonymous, how did she know their skin color?
I don't know. You read the pieces in the media, it's fascinating, you know?
Yeah.
So I was doing an anti-bullying startup that I was really passionate about, and I got a phone call from her, and I put up basically a 3-minute video on Kickstarter teasing what we were gonna do. I said this one sentence, which was a figure of speech that I think set the alarms off. I said, what we're doing is figuratively lifting the masks up off of trolls. At the time, she was working at Twitter. She was working for Twitter for something called Crash Override Network, and I immediately received an inbox from her on Twitter saying she'd like to talk to me about and try to convince me that the project that I'm doing is bad, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So she calls me up, and I have no idea who she is. I don't know what Gamergate is. I don't know what doxing means. And she says, you have to pull your project because people actually don't want to find out who harassed them. She said, I'm a victim, but I never want to know who harassed me on the internet. Like, she was basically arguing a point that didn't make sense. If she was actually harassed on the internet, then obviously my technology would be a godsend because they never figured out who harassed her. And I said, you know, I appreciate the phone call. This isn't really making sense to me.
Yeah.
You know?
It sounds literally the reverse of what you'd think she would have called you to say.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like, she should have been on board with what I was doing. Totally appreciate the phone call, but I'm not going to pull my Kickstarter. And she started crying. And she said, if you don't, it's going to ruin everything. And she told me that she spends time on 4chan because of what she does, and she saw that people were already talking about my project, and if I didn't pull it, they these anonymous white men and Trump supporters, you have to remember this was during the election cycle, were going to come after me and dox my family, which essentially means put up their personal information so people can try to kill them. That's what she says.
So she said this is what they are going to do. So she was oddly threatening you with being doxxed, but it wasn't she that was going to dox you.
She thought I was a total moron, I think, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'm not pulling my project. She hangs up the phone crying. Within 2 hours, we were absolutely inundated. About 4,000 emails via Kickstarter, like, you know, nigger, 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 die, 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 you know, pull your project. And they have these super obvious screen names like, you know, Trump or die, you know, Trump 2020, white man behind computer.
That's a good one. That guy's always
So, and I'm like, is she kidding? All men, by the way. Everyone was like, you know, Dave at, you know, Bob at, no woman. And magically, everything that she tried to warn me about came true within a couple of hours of me refusing to pull my project.
Questions to consider. What is correlated? Zoe Quinn worked for Twitter on an anti-harassment project called Crash Override. Fake accounts, many of them obvious, and alleged white nationalist involvement, even though they were anonymous. When Candace Owens said she wouldn't pull her project, what did Zoe Quinn mean when she said, it's going to ruin everything? What would the impact have been on Russian interference? Was there a connection between the fake accounts associated with Russian interference and the ones Candace Owens received threats from?
It's so interesting that she used the word everything. You're going to ruin everything. That's a really fascinating little play. And you know how sometimes one word can actually change everything? It can change everything. One word, but you're going to ruin everything. Like, you would think that in her line of work and with all these people, they're always complaining about these trolls. You would have been handing them the golden ticket.
Right. And I am convinced it's because they are running essentially an anti-marketing firm, right? So they get people to go online and they can build people up or take them down, or they can get people fired up by pretending that they're white men, you know, and during the election cycle, that was needed.
The impact of mainstream media. While much of the focus on the investigation focused on Russian Times America and social media outlets like Facebook and Twitter, the investigation failed to look at the big picture in assessing how social media correlated with American mainstream media. As it relates to Donald Trump, mainstream media outlets focused on support from white nationalists, allegations of racism, and alleged ties to Russia. However, over 50% of the ads paid for by Russia were dedicated to Black Pride and Black Lives Matter. Wouldn't the combined impact have done more to hurt Trump's campaign? Additionally, American mainstream media aired people who claimed that the stock market would collapse if Donald Trump was elected president. One of the factors that tends to have a big impact on election is polling data. The election forecast provided by mainstream media outlets suggested that Hillary Clinton would be the winner. This has the potential to discourage people to vote for Donald Trump. After all, why would they put forth the effort and spend the time to vote on a candidate who will likely lose? How many FBI agents forget their password? In recent news, we learned that the Justice Department officials are being pressed to investigate whether federal record-keeping laws were violated during the Russian investigation. This stems from a Freedom of Information Act release from the Justice Department, which showed at least 27 instances of phones being wiped or reset for various reasons, including 15 due to passcodes forgotten or being entered too many times. Questions to consider. Is this a coincidence? Does this number seem high to you? How does this number compare with agents outside the investigation, or the number of forgotten passwords in previous years? Is the FBI in the habit of hiring people who can't remember their passwords? Were Obama and Biden in on it? Put it all together. American mainstream media portrayed Donald Trump as a racist who received support from white nationalists, interviewed people who said Trump would destroy the economy, and forecasted Hillary Clinton would win the election. Facebook ads, in combination with mainstream media, seemed to support Clinton more than Trump. More than 50% were for Black Pride and Black Lives Matter, escalating concerns about racism and a candidate accused of catering to racists. The ads that were used to sow hate and discontent in the 2016 election elicited an emotional and almost contagious response. Voter suppression ads on Twitter wouldn't have fooled most people. They came from accounts that were obvious fakes and made to appear as Trump supporters. Those who texted the number were directed to sign up for Hillary for America's list. A Twitter employee working on an anti-harassment project wanted Candace Owens to pull a project that would have helped unmask internet trolls. When Candace refused, Zoe said it would ruin everything. Within hours, Candace began receiving threats from obvious fake accounts. The FBI accepted data from an informant who was paid to help the Democratic National Committee and conduct opposition research on Trump. Multiple FBI agents had their phones wiped throughout the investigation. Peter Strzok, who had animus towards the president and his supporters, messaged Lisa Page about an insurance policy. During a congressional inquiry, Peter appeared to indicate he had enough data to tie Trump to Russia in the summer of 2016, even though he wasn't assigned to the investigation until July 31st, 2016. Doesn't any of this seem questionable to you?